There's a secret buried in the dusty folds of American history, one so dark, so deeply twisted, that it was never meant for you to hear. Imagine for a moment a family, or better yet, a cluster of children, born not just under strange circumstances, but under a veil of unnatural horror. Triplets and siblings whose existence defies all reason, children who vanish and return changed, who speak in voices that aren't theirs, who mark the land with curses invisible to the untrained eye. This was America between 1880 and 1910, a time when the veil between the natural and the unexplainable thinned, when towns whispered names no one dared speak aloud. This is not a tale of innocent childhood, but a story of bloodlines tied to something far older and far darker than any history book will ever admit. A story of institutional manipulation, psychological control, and ancient corruption festering beneath the surface of burgeoning cities and rural backwaters alike. You're about to descend into the macabre mysteries of triplets, siblings, and children beyond all reason. Families who bore not just children, but vessels for hidden agendas that stretched across generations, manipulating minds, twisting realities, and feeding off the fears of entire communities. These were not mere children, they were instruments of something bigger, something sinister, orchestrated by forces hidden within society's very foundations. So, listen closely. What you're about to learn has been erased from records, locked away in whispered warnings, and concealed behind the facade of progress and civilization. These children were the epicenter of a psychological control system, one designed to warp the minds of those around them, to bleed sanity dry, and to ensure that no one, no outsider, could ever break the cycle. The families they came from were marked, hunted, yet revered in secret rituals cloaked in silence. Look around you now. The stories you've been told about the innocence of childhood, about family bonds, and about community safety, they're lies crafted to blind you. What if those smiles hiding in old photographs held secrets you were never meant to understand? What if those siblings, born too close together in time, were part of a design, part of a plan that shaped not only their fate, but the fate of a nation? The clock is ticking. The dark legacy from that era still pulses beneath the surface of our modern world. It's time to peel back the layers and stare directly into the abyss. This knowledge changes everything. It changes the way you see family, society, and the very nature of identity. Brace yourself. What follows is dangerous truth. Truth that once heard can never be unheard. Are you ready to see the children who should not be, to witness the corruption encoded in bloodlines, and to face the sinister forces lurking in the shadows of American history? This is your awakening. Step inside and never look away. In the quiet towns haunted by these unnatural births, the children themselves became living enigmas, shadows among the living. Triplets, born at the same time yet not quite the same, carried an eerie bond that stretched beyond mere family ties. It wasn't just shared DNA. It was something darker, a psychic link, an invisible thread that controlled their thoughts, their emotions, their very wills. Families whispered about the silence that fell over the house when these children gathered. Conversations would halt mid-sentence, eyes would dart nervously, and even animals seemed to sense the unnatural presence. The triplets rarely played like normal children. Instead, they moved with unsettling coordination, finishing each other's sentences in strange tongues, or sometimes none at all. But the strangest and most terrifying aspect was how the children aged unevenly. One sibling might bloom into adolescence while the others remained pale and frail, their eyes dull and glassy. Sometimes one would disappear, only to be found miles away with no memory of how they got there. Some townsfolk said they could hear faint chanting at night from the abandoned houses where these children lived, whispers of a ritual older than the nation itself. Behind these haunting manifestations lay the architects of the unnatural births, shadowy figures embedded within scientific and religious institutions. They wore respectable faces by day, doctors, clergy, local officials, but at night they delved into forbidden experiments, attempting to bind generations with invisible chains. Their goal was control over life, death, and the fragile human soul. They believed that by engineering these children, triplets and siblings, they could forge a new order, one where the past's ancient evils were harnessed, not feared. But as with all dark deals, the price was far higher than they imagined. These children carried a curse, an indelible mark that would eventually tear their families and communities apart, leaving behind echoes of madness and loss that still linger. Some survivors spoke of a presence, not entirely human, that visited the children, a shadow that seeped through cracks in reality. Was it a guardian, a tormentor, or something far more sinister feeding on the children's fractured souls? No one knew for sure. What is clear is this: the legacy of these triplets and siblings is not just a tale of birth and blood, but of power and corruption, a story that threads through the dark veins of history and pulses even now beneath the surface of modern life. Beneath the surface of ordinary towns and sleepy streets, hidden in the shadows of ancient churches and forgotten basements, secret societies thrived. These groups, known only through whispered legends and cryptic symbols, wove dark rituals around the triplets and siblings. Their ceremonies were a grotesque blend of old-world mysticism and twisted modern science. The heart of their belief was that these children were vessels, gateways between worlds. Born under specific celestial alignments and with bloodlines intertwined by fate, the triplets carried a fragment of something beyond human understanding. The secret societies sought to harness that fragment, to unlock doors to other realms where time, spirit, and power flowed differently. Every few years, when the stars aligned in forbidden patterns, these groups convened in secluded locations, crypts, caves, and deep forests, to perform rites that blurred the line between sacrifice and salvation. The triplets were both participants and prisoners in these ceremonies, their psychic bonds manipulated to open gateways or summon entities from the shadows. The rituals left scars on the land, the community, and the children themselves. Some siblings emerged changed, their eyes reflecting knowledge no child should have, speaking in tongues that chilled those around them. Others vanished altogether, swallowed by the very forces they were meant to command. But not all the triplets and siblings were doomed to suffer passively. Some began to resist, their psychic connections a double-edged sword that gave them glimpses of the dark plans and the power to disrupt them. These children, marked by both curse and gift, became reluctant rebels against the ancient order. Their struggle was a dangerous one, a game of shadows and secrets, where every ally might be a traitor and every refuge could become a trap. As the old societies tightened into their grip and new players emerged from the shadows, the battle for the children's souls grew fiercer, a hidden war that would decide the fate of more than just the families involved. The question lingered: was this darkness ever meant to be undone? Or was it a cycle destined to repeat, generation after generation, feeding on the innocent until nothing remained but echoes? In the midst of shadows and secrets, a small but growing resistance began to take shape. Children born into these cursed bloodlines who refused to be pawns in a game far beyond their understanding. These siblings and triplets, marked by the rituals and bound by psychic connections, found strength in their shared torment. They were no longer victims, but warriors in an invisible war. The resistance was fragile, scattered across towns and cities hidden in plain sight. It wasn't led by adults or traditional heroes, but by the children themselves, those who had glimpsed the true horror of the secret societies and lived to fight back. They communicated in cryptic codes and psychic whispers, passing warnings and plans through minds attuned to the same strange energies. Some of the children developed uncanny abilities, telepathy, precognition, and strange manipulations of light and shadow. These gifts were both blessing and curse, amplifying their connection to the dark forces they sought to break free from. Each step toward rebellion was perilous. Every victory came with a price. The Resistance's goal was twofold: to unravel the ancient rituals and symbols that bound the society's power, and to protect future generations from being born into the same cycle of manipulation and despair. They scoured forgotten libraries, hacked encrypted archives, and infiltrated secret meetings, piecing together the truth hidden beneath layers of myth and deception. Yet the secret societies were always watching, their influence seeping into every corner of the world: politics, religion, science. The children's fight was a race against time and power. Allies were rare, and trust even rarer, as the Dark Order employed spies and enforcers to root out the Resistance before it could grow strong enough to shatter their control. Amid this struggle, unsettling clues began to surface. Ancient prophecies, symbols etched in stone, and disturbing patterns in the stars, hinting at a reckoning looming on the horizon. The Resistance understood that the battle was not just for their own freedom, but for the fate of the world itself. Would the children's courage be enough to break the cycle? Or were they destined to become the next generation of pawns in a never-ending game of shadows? The night was thick with an unnatural silence as the Resistance gathered at the ancient stone circle, an eerie nexus where the veils between worlds were thin. Here, beneath the blood moon, the final confrontation was set to unfold. The children, no longer innocent victims, stood united in defiance, their psychic bonds pulsing with raw power. The secret societies had summoned their most fearsome enforcers, shadows draped in whispers, eyes glowing with malice, their every movement a twisted dance of control and cruelty. But the Resistance was ready. Years of sacrifice had honed their abilities, and a fierce determination blazed in their hearts. As the first clash erupted, the air crackled with energy, spells woven from ancient languages, minds locked in silent battles of will, light piercing through shadows. The ground trembled, trees seemed to groan, and the very stars above flickered in uneasy witness. Amid the chaos, the Resistance uncovered the ultimate secret, a hidden ritual buried deep within the foundations of the world's oldest temples. This ritual, if disrupted, could sever the society's power forever, but it came with a terrible cost. One of their own would have to become the living vessel for the ancient forces they sought to banish, risking corruption or obliteration. In the final moments, a chosen child stepped forward, eyes glowing with a mixture of fear and resolve. As the ritual began, the world seemed to hold its breath. Shadows writhed and screamed, light shattered and reformed, and time itself twisted around the sacrifice. When the dust settled, the secret societies were broken, their grip on the world shattered like glass. But the victory was bittersweet. The chosen child was changed forever, a guardian between worlds, carrying the weight of countless souls. The Resistance disbanded, their mission complete, but the story was far from over. The chill sacrifice was a beacon, a warning that darkness never truly dies, only sleeps, waiting for the next dawn to rise. Listen closely now, because here the story sinks into a darkness that gnaws at the edges of sanity itself. The Bellroot family was no ordinary curse upon the land. They were the epicenter of a creeping rot that defied explanation, a slow poison infecting the very soul of Marrowfield. As the years passed, their home became less a dwelling and more a sentient entity, an ancient parasite feeding on the fear and flesh of the living. The town's children, once bright-eyed and carefree, began to change. It started subtly, the way their eyes gleamed in the twilight, too knowing for their years, like they carried secrets better left forgotten. They spoke less and listened more, their small hands often clutching strange talismans fashioned from bone, rusted nails, and fragments of mirror. These artifacts were never explained, never sold, only found, secreted in the darkest corners of the Bellroot property or buried beneath the roots of ancient oaks. Old Widow Hensley, the town's unofficial historian and keeper of records, vanished without a trace after a night spent cataloging the Bellroot's elusive origins. Her home was found smoldering, a charred wreckage devoid of any evidence save for a single Bellroot, an old twisted root wrapped in faded paper inscribed with symbols that made even the most learned men recoil. Those who dared to study it swore they could hear whispers emanating from the twisted fibers, whispers of broken promises, of rituals conducted in the dead of night by candlelight, by figures shrouded in veils of shadow. The Bellroots themselves seemed to feed on the town's unraveling sanity. Agnes and Ruth, the twins, became more spectral than human, appearing in multiple places at once, their laughter echoing like a dirge through the streets. Their eyes no longer reflected the world, but swallowed it whole, deep, black pools where light died. Silas, their elder Brawrs, other, transformed into a preacher of a dark gospel, one whispered from cracked lips and stained tomes, filled with incantations that twisted minds and bent wills. He spoke of the hollowing, a creeping void consuming the boundaries between life and death, reality and nightmare. Marrowfield's land itself rebelled against existence. Crops rotted beneath the sun, rivers ran thick with mud and blood, and animals fled or vanished. Even the seasons lost meaning. Winter bled into summer without warning. Days stretched impossibly long or ended in sudden, unnatural darkness. Local dogs refused to cross the Bellroot threshold, and cats howled beneath the moon like mourners at a funeral for a town already lost. It was said that the Bellroot house didn't merely stand upon the earth. It rooted into it, feeding from some abysmal source beneath, growing like a malignant seed. At night, a low hum pulsed beneath its foundations, a sound not heard but felt deep within the chest, sinking with the heartbeat of something far older than the town itself. Those who ventured too close spoke of the smell, a sickly sweet odor, like decay wrapped in jasmine, that clung to the air and poisoned the soul. And then there were the bells. Not the bells of churches or town halls, but spectral bells that rang in the dead of night, heard only by those who dared to listen. Their toll was a summons, a call to something beyond the veil. The sound carried in dreams and waking moments alike, stirring a primal terror in the hearts of men who had never before known fear. Blood would trickle from eyes as the toll echoed, and some who heard it simply disappeared, swallowed by the night, their fates sealed by the unseen forces wielded by the Bellroots. The ledger did not just list names, it held the souls of those bound to this unnatural covenant. Each entry pulsed with a cold life, a tether dragging the living into shadows they could never escape. Those whose names were written found themselves unmoored from reality, slipping into madness or vanishing entirely. No one knew who wrote it, nor where the pages came from, but the ledger was a commandment from something older than the land itself. A contract forged in blood and silence. One night, a stranger appeared at the edge of Hollow Bend. He was gaunt, cloaked in black, eyes hollow like deep wells of forgotten pain. The townsfolk called him the Chronicler, though no one knew what he chronicled or for whom. He carried a journal bound in cracked leather and whispered secrets that bent time and space. He said the Bellroots were not a family, but a phenomenon, an ancient corruption passed down through fractured souls and bloodlines cursed to reproduce the horror again and again. The chronicler claimed that the Bellroots were the living vessels of a forgotten god, one cast out and buried beneath the soil beneath Hollow Bend. Trapped, yes, but breathing still, feeding off the fear and broken hope of those foolish enough to trespass. The god's hunger was endless, and the Bellroots its flesh, its eyes, its claws. The ledger was the god's ledger, every name a tally, every tally a debt. The chronicler warned that the true horror was not the Bellroots themselves, but the machinery behind them, a system of psychological control that had been engineered to enslave minds through fear, symbols, and silence. A design so intricate it bent the will of entire towns, turning people into living ciphers, locked in rituals and patterns too dangerous to disrupt. The bell ringing, the whispered names, the shifting shadows, they were all part of a dark algorithm, a blueprint to fracture reality and rewrite the rules of life and death. As the chronicler spoke, the sky fractured again, faint blue lightning etching unnatural runes into the clouds. The ground beneath the Bellroots' house trembled with a sound like the slow beating of a monstrous heart. He handed his journal to a young man standing nearby, whose eyes were wide with terror and fascination. The ledger did not just list names, it held the souls of those bound to this unnatural covenant. Each entry pulsed with a cold life, a tether dragging the living into shadows they could never escape. Those whose names were written found themselves unmoored from reality, slipping into madness or vanishing entirely. No one knew who wrote it, nor where the pages came from, but the ledger was a commandment from something older than the land itself, a contract forged in blood and silence. One night, a stranger appeared at the edge of Hollow Bend. He was gaunt, cloaked in black, eyes hollow like deep wells of forgotten pain. The townsfolk called him the Chronicler, though no one knew what he chronicled or for whom. He carried a journal bound in cracked leather and whispered secrets that bent time and space. He said the Bellroots were not a family, but a phenomenon, an ancient corruption passed down through fractured souls and bloodlines cursed to reproduce the horror again and again. The chronicler claimed that the Bellroots were the living vessels of a forgotten god, one cast out and buried beneath the soil beneath Hollow Bend. Trapped, yes, but breathing still, feeding off the fear and broken hope of those foolish enough to trespass. The god's hunger was endless, and the Bellroots its flesh, its eyes, its claws. The ledger was the god's ledger, every name a tally, every tally a debt. The chronicler warned that the true horror was not the Bellroots themselves, but the machinery behind them, a system of psychological control that had been engineered to enslave minds through fear, symbols, and silence. A design so intricate it bent the will of entire towns, turning people into living ciphers, locked in rituals and patterns too dangerous to disrupt. The bell ringing, the whispered names, the shifting shadows, they were all part of a dark algorithm, a blueprint to fracture reality. That night, as the town slept beneath a silvered moon, the young man followed the chronicler's instructions to the hidden entrance beneath the Bellroots' home. The cellar door, once sealed and forgotten, groaned open to reveal a spiraling stone staircase descending into a cold, suffocating abyss. Each step echoed with the whispers of the past, voices of those who had come before, warnings and pleas woven into the cold air. The walls pulsed faintly, veins of black roots crawling like living shadows, as if Nokthar's reach extended even here, deep beneath the earth. At the bottom, a cavern stretched wide, lit by flickering phosphorescent fungi clinging to ancient stone. In the center lay the altar, an obsidian slab inscribed with runes that throbbed with a malevolent pulse. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something older, something primordial. The young man placed the journal on the altar, reciting the incantations the chronicler had painstakingly recorded. The runes flared, casting grotesque shadows that danced along the walls. The ground trembled as a presence stirred beneath the stone, an immense, silent hunger awakening from its long slumber. From the darkness, a shape began to take form, a mass of shifting roots and shadow, eyes like burning coals staring into the soul. Nokthar had come. The young man stood firm, gripping the ancient talisman he had found in the attic, a relic of forgotten light. The battle was not of swords or fire, but of will and spirit. To survive, he had to resist the god's seductive whispers, its promises of power in exchange for surrender. The cavern filled with a roaring silence as minds clashed in the void, hope against oblivion, and in that eternal moment, the fate of the Bellroots and the cursed town hung by a fragile thread. The young man's grip on the talisman tightened as Nokthar's fiery eyes bore into him, seeking to unravel his resolve. The god's voice was a sinister melody, echoing in his mind with promises of dominion over life and death, whispers that curled like smoke around his thoughts. But the talisman blazed with a pure light, a remnant of an ancient covenant between man and the old gods who had once sealed Nokthar away. The shadows recoiled, and the cavern shuddered as the god's form wavered, caught between the hunger for freedom and the chains of the past. Suddenly, the ground cracked beneath their feet, and a surge of power erupted from the altar. The young man felt a warmth spreading through him, a gift of strength and courage from the unseen forces guarding the world from darkness. With a cry that shattered the silence, he thrust the talisman forward. A beam of radiant energy pierced Nokthar's form, unraveling the shadowy tendrils like thread. The god's roar shook the cavern as it was forced back into the depths, bound once more by the ancient rites. Breathless and trembling, the young man watched as the altar's glow faded, the cavern sinking into stillness once again. The curse that had plagued the Bellroots and their town was broken, at least for now. But deep within the earth, a faint pulse lingered, a reminder that some shadows never fully disappear.